Greetings. We are Patty and Alan Brown. We want to thank Karen Roxburgh and Shirley Escher for assembling the Crazy Quilt exhibit at Rocky Mountain Quilt Museum. We're going to talk about the crazy quilts from our collection on display.
When we entered the gallery on opening day, we were overwhelmed by the sight. It literally took my breath away. The crazy quilts dazzled under the wonderful museum lights. Alan and I are a team, designing and sewing our crazy quilt projects. Alan has a good feel for color and design.
We work together throughout the design and construction process. We're both involved in design, piecing, and embellishing. Patty is the project coordinator.
I began quilting in 1978. I started with patchwork and applique quilts. In 1982, my love for crazy quilting was inspired when I met Judith Baker Montano at the Colorado Springs Embroidered Guild. I believe Judith's artistry and books are partly responsible for the resurgence of the interest in crazy quilts.
We've made several crazy quilt projects: Christmas stockings, crazy quilt padded lids for sewing baskets, and squares for friends, before we embarked on our first large-scale crazy quilt.
We bought our first antique crazy quilt in 1982. We framed it. It hangs in our home. More crazy quilts were purchased. Favorites have been mounted on fabric and stretched for display. The internet made finding crazy quilts much easier. Purchases accelerated because quilts could be viewed online.
At first, the quilts were purchased to display. Then our interest became more oriented toward design and construction techniques. As our collection expanded, we considered writing and illustrating a book about crazy quilts. If we author a book, we want it to have lavish photographs sharing many details from the quilts. We will attempt to accomplish that goal in this tour. We are sharing highlights from each quilt, including detail photos.
Each crazy quilt purchase has inspired us with more interest. The virtual tour can't replace a visit in person to view all the details included in these wonderful crazy quilts, but it will allow us to share with a much wider audience. We hope you enjoyed the tour. Bobby's Square. Bobby's Square was made for my best friend, Barbara Ruth Moore Bush. We became friends in junior high and remained close friends throughout our lives. She and I were kindred spirits. Bobby was an artist. She said she would love it if we made her a monochromatic crazy quilt in white. We opted to make a square containing symbols associated with her life.
Bobby was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2002. Bobby's Square was made by Patty, myself, and our daughter, Katie. Bobby received the framed square in 2005. Sadly, she lost her battle with breast cancer in 2008. The square was returned to us after her passing.
A village ribbon represents Germany, where Bobby's mother was born. Bobby enjoyed visits with her extended family in Germany. I added Swarovski crystals as snowflakes on the ribbon representing Bobby's childhood in Colorado. Prismatic snowflakes crystals represent her son and 2 granddaughters.
The star represents the state of Texas, where Bobby and her father were born. Texas was Bobby's home for several years with her husband, Joe Bush, before they returned to Colorado.
The pearls were from my wedding gown. I was in Bobby's wedding, and she was a bridesmaid in our wedding. Another reason I added pearls to the quilt was because her married name was Barbara Bush. If someone asked her about her name when it was called out in public, she would smile mischievously, put her hand up to her throat, and ask, "Oh, did I forget my pearls?"
The cross on the quilt is made of moonstones. Bobby was a devout Christian. She was active in church in her home communities in Colorado and Texas. She and Joe did ministry work in England. The square includes machine-embroidered motifs, the monogram paisleys, and a spider web. I added the hand-embroidered spider and other embellishments to the machine embroidery.
Ribbons were used to form a fan in the corner. They were embellished with embroidery stitches and beads. A large snowflake was embroidered using whisper mohair and accented with faceted moonstones. Silk ribbon roses were added along a seam. I chose roses for the theme because Bobby and I both loved roses. Boom, boom, ain't it great to be crazy? Boom Boom, Ain't It Great to Be Crazy is the quilt designed, sewn, and embroidered by Alan and me. We began the quilt in 2007 and finished it in 2015. It was machine quilted by Valerie Campbell. She incorporated images from the blocks throughout her quilting.
Each square in the quilt represents someone in our family and wonderful friends who touched our lives. We wanted to make our quilt in the manner of a Victorian crazy quilt. Silk fabric was used. It includes cotton, silk, metal, and Brazilian embroidery threads. Embellishments include glass beads, mother-of-pearl buttons, gemstones, and Swarovski crystals.
I asked each one of my needle art teachers to make a piece to use in the quilt. The second row of the quilt contains a black collar from my great aunt's mourning dress. I played with the collar when I was a young girl. The third row represents our children. Our daughter Katie is an environmentalist. We use flowers, bees, and a hummingbird for her. Our son, Tyler, loved dragons when he was young. A colossal dragon flies across his square.
America's flag waves on our brief history of the USA. It includes Jamestown, the Liberty Bell, and the moon landing, which was voted man's greatest accomplishment during the 20th century. The red rose is America's national flower. A button artist handcrafted porcelain buttons of the Liberty Bell, Earth, and Moon to our specifications. A gold cross represents our country's motto, "In God We Trust."
Alan and I, our children and grandchildren, were born in Colorado. To honor our state, we used the Colorado flag, columbines, blue spruce, a snowflake, and a snow-covered Pikes Peak. Purple silk fabric from my grandfather's bathrobe provides the background for the chicks. I love spiders, so there are lots of embroidered spiders and webs on the quilt. The first square we made has iris, Tennessee's state flower. They represent my parents who were born there. We chose to use machine embroidered elements in our quilt as a reflection of our time. Each was embellished with hand embroidery.
The center square represents our grandson, Liam Arley, whose nursery theme was African animals. I made the Russian needle-punch leopard in the center. The eye of the leopard is a faceted sapphire. The white pearl is Liam's birthstone. We used fabric from ties that belonged to his namesake and grandfather's.
Our youngest grandson, Owen Edward, had a nautical-themed nursery. We created his square with a sailboat on the water. Embroidery stitches highlight the sky and ocean. A mother-of-pearl button, oysters, and a nautilus are in the sea. Fabric from one of Alan's ties is included.
Katie and Neil were married in San Francisco. She embroidered the Golden Gate Bridge on purple velvet for their wedding square. Tyler and Melody's features red roses, the theme of their wedding. The squares include fabric from the ties I wore to their weddings and ribbons from Katie and Melody's bouquets.
Boom Boom is a double-sided crazy quilt. We have an antique double-sided crazy quilt. I reasoned if a woman from the Victorian era could construct a double-sided crazy quilt, then a woman from the 20th century could do it too. It was the hardest needle arts challenge I have ever accomplished. Our quilt has 2 tops, 2 thin battings, and 2 muslin backings used in its construction. The 2 sides were hand-stitched together to stabilize the quilt.
The reverse is a whole cloth quilt, machine quilted by Valerie. I designed the central medallion with an image of our family tree, Pike's Peak, and the Garden of the Gods. Valerie quilted the family names. The quilted vines and plumes are reminiscent of Amish quilts.
The Christmas Crazy Quilt. Alan bought the Christmas Crazy Quilt for me as a gift for Christmas in 2002. It was collected in New England and purchased on eBay.
The quilt appealed to me because of the variety of striped fabrics using Christmas colors. I was also drawn to the ribbon flowers resembling daffodils, the original floral embroideries on black, and the embroidered snowflakes scattered throughout. In this collage of ribbon flowers, you see a red striped fabric was also used.
It was really deteriorating and shattering. A red silk fabric was used 5 times throughout the quilt, and it had significant shattering shown in this collage. For display at the Rocky Mountain Quilt Museum exhibition, we chose to do a partial restoration. The 5 red pieces that had deteriorated so badly were replaced with red silk.
The shattering process takes a combination of chemistry use and passing time to develop. It is caused by metallic salts bonded to the silk fibers through the process of weighting or dyeing the fabric. Through time, the threads weaken as the sharp salts shred the fibers.
Similar red and cream striped fabrics appear in different places in the quilt. The shattering is most apparent in areas along fold lines. This reinforces the need to fold quilts for storage in a variety of ways.
This view of the restored quilt has typical fold lines highlighted. Fold the quilt in half, again in half, making quarters, then into eighths. You can notice many of the remaining shattered pieces fall near the fold lines.
Ribbon and embroidered flowers appealed together in this section. Seam embroidery using the herringbone stitch was often layered in multiple colors.
A colorful snowflake and tall lanky flower are adjacent to a plaid fabric that is also deteriorating. Warp threads remain intact while the weft threads have broken apart. It is possible to stabilize fabrics if the intention is to conserve the piece. We chose to add some stabilization to this area rather than try and find a suitable replacement.
A multi-layered blue striped fabric is next to a basket of embroidered flowers. More striped fabrics and a pink snowflake fill this section. Again, multiple rows of herringbone stitches cover the seams. Various weights, colors, and strands were used. This crazy quilt was tied with a flesh-colored pearl cotton. It has a thin batting in addition to the foundation and backing.
The Cooper Crazy Quilt. Cooper Crazy Quilt was purchased on eBay in 2007. The seller indicated it came from Connecticut and hung above John Cooper's bed. It is made from silk, satin, velvet, and brocades. Embroidery was done with silk and cotton floss. There are oil-painted patches. It features a large gold velvet border with mitered corners and nice embroidery along the border. The ribbon rose with embroidery was the reason I bid on the quilt. I wanted to be able to see how this rose was made. The gold velvet border is accented with embroidery. This is one of 2 quilts in our collection whose makers put 100 tiny pieces in a block. A yellow, black, and red plaid silk ribbon has rows of cross stitches embroidered on the black areas. The acorn in this corner was unusual. You can see the mitered corners on the border, along with some black silk that is shattering. At least 4 brocade ribbons are visible in this block, featuring yellow embroidery on the seams. Herringbone, lazy daisy, and fly stitches are observed.
The DuPont Crazy Quilt. This magnificent crazy quilt was made for Henry Francis DuPont. He was an American horticulturist, an expert and collector of early American furniture, and a breeder of cattle. The quilt was sold during an estate sale of his Chesterfield estate in Long Island, New York. The set includes the crazy quilt and 2 European pillow covers. We purchased the set from Skinner Auction House in 2007.
It's most fitting that the embroidery on this quilt is of beautiful flowers found throughout the gardens of the DuPont estates. Henry was responsible for the design and development of the gardens.
The quilt is made entirely of velvet patches. They are primarily medium and dark colors, so the embroidery stands out. The set has a blue silk satin backing.
The embroidery is done with silk, cotton, and wool. The scale of the embroidery and luxurious fabrics set this quilt apart.
The H on the quilt stands for Henry Francis DuPont. He graduated from Harvard with a degree in horticulture in 1903. The wheat symbolizes prosperity. To the left of the H is a ruche silk ribbon rose.
Wild roses and a yellow bird shine against the dark background. Brightly colored combination of embroidery stitches highlight the seams.
Sunflowers were popular on crazy quilts. They symbolize pure thoughts.
Peacock feathers symbolize glory, vision, royalty, and nobility.
Wild roses and daisies are featured on this pillow cover.
The DuPont Crazy Quilt and pillow covers are on display next to a beautiful crazy quilt from the Rocky Mountain Quilt Museum's permanent collection. Fanfare Star. Fanfare Star quilt is our most recent acquisition. It was purchased October 2019. A friend noticed it at the Houston Quilt Festival. When she rounded a corner and caught sight of it, she gasped. "It just took my breath away," she exclaimed. She posted a photo online. Patty and I were in total agreement. We communicated with our friend, and she brokered the deal within the hour.
Our quilt appraiser advised us to look for unusual crazy quilts. We thought this one fit the bill. We named the quilt Fanfare Star because it contains so many fans, and obviously it is in the shape of a star. We thought it was the perfect addition to our collection.
This contained crazy quilt is an elaborate 12-pointed star composed of 32 diamonds. Each diamond features brightly colored silk ribbons, and colorful embroidery.
Each diamond contains a fan. This highlighted view shows 4 diamonds assembled to form one of 6 larger diamonds. 6 sections like this were pieced together to make a 6-pointed star.
6 more individual diamond blocks were added between the points to bring the total to 12. Bright solid colored fabric and ribbons form the fans. Black bands and bases emphasize the fan shape. Fancy silk brocades, plaids, checks, stripes, and embroidered patches fill in the remainder of the diamond shapes.
Opposing fans in this view show the variety of embroidery stitches used. The maker used bright contrasting colors for big impact. Pink and light blue highlight the black bands in this area.
Bright yellow feather stitch variations stand out on black surrounding these fans.
My understanding about horseshoes is that they are displayed in an upward orientation so you can keep your luck. We learned Victorians turned them upside down to share their luck.
The maker embroidered designs on black, burgundy, and dark blue prior to piecing her blocks. This butterfly lost part of his wing in construction of the diamond.
You can appreciate the variety of stitches and their interplay in this view of one fan.
Enjoy the star. Friendship Diamond. The Friendship Diamond Crazy Quilt was made in 1885 in Massachusetts. The location is inferred by a ribbon for a reunion in Wilbraham, Massachusetts. It is a contained crazy quilt using diamonds for the basic shape. Ribbons were used frequently. They were used as the lattice strips and in many diamonds.
This is the central medallion from the Friendship Diamond Crazy Quilt. 2 nationally known quilt appraisers have appraised this quilt. Both of them said the quilt appears to have been made by several different women, thus the name Friendship Diamond Crazy Quilt. Embroidery skills demonstrated on the different diamonds suggest varying levels of proficiency.
This close-up of the goldenrod allows observation of highly developed skills. The meaning associated with goldenrod is encouragement. Chenille and silk threads were used.
I would have loved being the recipient of these diamonds. Maybe she received them for her birthday, or maybe as a wedding gift. Who knows? But it was a wonderful act of friendship to give them. You can find embroidered paisley motifs on antique crazy quilts. The strawberries, meaning perfect goodness, are exquisitely embroidered.
2 blue Merry Christmas ribbons were included in different diamonds. They were from the packaging of Whitman's chocolate candy.
The diamond with the bonneted little girl is probably a silk tobacco premium. Beautiful images were lithographed on silk. The colors are still vibrant today. The landscape with the gardener in the foreground is also most likely a tobacco premium.
Several of the diamonds have embroidered birds. Some are embroidered using silk threads, while others are embroidered with chenille. Several Kate Greenaway figures are found.
The skating party ribbon dated May 1st, 1882 was puzzling at first. How could there be an ice skating party in May? We learned Victorians loved roller skating. That explained the date in May. Roller skates were being mass-produced in America beginning in the 1880s. My personal favorite among the diamonds are the beautifully embroidered blackberries. Blackberries mean positive change.
The border is embroidered with gold silk threads. Images of fans fill the half diamonds along the borders. She used a stencil to put her pattern down. Along one edge, you can see the markings for embroidery never completed. The Philpott quilt. Philpott quilt is a contained crazy featuring paisley shapes to create Philpotts. The word Philpott means numerous feet. It is associated with well-being. Philpott symbols have been observed in many cultures through time. The design has been found in churches, on pottery, and clothing dating back centuries. American Indians used a similar design.
The embroidery materials and planning required to construct this crazy quilt make it remarkable. It is made of silk and silk velvet, and it is highly embroidered using silk threads. The maker of this crazy planned her work with precision. Philpotts were arranged in blocks on point. Generally, brighter and lighter colors were used to make the feet of the Philpotts. Black fabric was used in the central area behind the feet. Darker, more neutral fabrics filled the remainder of the background.
The colors suggest a fall palette. Orange, yellow, and off-white highlight the feet. I love the orange brocade ribbon included in this Philpott. Lazy daisy stitches, in combination with others, outline the feet, giving them an appearance of movement. Flowers are embroidered at each intersection.
Beautiful brocade fabrics, fancy silks, stripes, checks, plain woven, and velvets are included. Flowers and interlocking circles are embroidered in the background. Multi-layers of embroidery highlight the feet and the seams between the blocks.
This close-up of her border shows black patches, highlighted with orange, yellow, and green. They separate the body of the quilt from the border of paisley shapes. The quilt was mounted on linen for stabilization.
Here is a close-up of 1 foot from the filfot. Whimsical flowers shine on brown silk background. A beautiful yellow flower covers the intersection. Opposite that foot is this beauty. Black striped silk is sandwiched between burnt orange and yellow. Off-white, yellow, and orange stitches spark it up.
Enjoy these forget-me-nots in an intersection. Again, off-white lazy daisy stitches combined with orange to find the foot on the left and keep it from receding into the background. Cretan stitches are layered along one seam. A combination of lazy daisy stitches and fly stitches appear as a floral vine along another.
I use this quilt for inspiration when I'm embroidering on my crazy quilt projects because there are so many unique stitch combinations. This foot includes the lining from a top hat. The date 1887 was added. Dates are more common than names. We wish more crazy quilt artists would sign their quilts.
Here's another view that shows the nearby border. Again, we see brighter colors in the feet, accented by lively embroidery. The consistent use of black in the central part of the background helps to create depth. Off-white and orange surround these feet. Little white daisies are clustered together top left. Yellow and orange flowers are clustered below.
This close-up takes us back to the block with the beautiful orange brocade ribbon and provides a closer look at the embroidery. We become more aware of the beautiful floral brocades. Yellow and green stitches create interest in the middle of this filfot.
The flowers at the intersections of the blocks are remarkable. A close-up view of the sunflower allows greater appreciation of the remarkable detail. You can see the variety of colors and stitches used to cover the seams in this small area. Stem stitch surrounds the petals made using lazy daisy stitches on this light pink blossom. French knots fill the center. Twisted lazy daisy stitches make the lacy leaves. Joy of Music. The Joy of Music Crazy Quilt has a large central burgundy velvet square surrounded by crazy quilting. It is finished with a burgundy velvet border. A variety of flowers, Baptist fans, and birds are embroidered and painted around the border. Some of the embroidery is minute and delicate, but the majority is less restrained.
Its maker put in a lot of effort. She used a large variety of materials. The quilt includes a significant amount of chenille embroidery. One of the reasons we purchased this quilt was its inclusion of musical instruments. It's the only one we have found.
The guitar is made of velvet. It is embroidered with silk threads. Tiny buttonhole stitches applique it to the background.
I love how she embroidered the flowers on her violin. Yellow birds are embroidered on several of our antique crazies. This may be a yellow warbler. The fan is made from ribbons.
The basket in the top corner was stitched using chenille thread on a foundation of red silk fabric. The flowers and foliage in the basket are also made of chenille. Notice the small brown piece with flowers in the middle near the top. We'll check out a close-up in the next photo.
This slide shows some of the minute flowers she embroidered on the quilt. This rectangle is less than 1 inch by 2 inches. The 6-pointed star has a paper piece foundation. Pansies are oil painted on several pieces. The fabric below the pansies was starting to split, so I used the softest bridal veil illusion I could find to stabilize the painted flowers until proper conservation can be done. Tiny forget-me-nots were also painted.
This colorful bird was cut from printed fabric and appliqued to the faux fur background. It was embroidered with silk threads. The butterfly is made of velvet and also embroidered with silk. The Language of Flowers Crazy Quilt. We believe the maker of this quilt had the initials JFF. This monogram appears on 4 blocks. I wish she'd embroidered her name so we could identify her and give her credit. I encourage each of you to put your full name and date on your quilts. The quilt is made of silk and cotton fabrics and silk ribbons. She used silk and cotton threads for embroidery. It's richly embellished with colorful florals, monograms, and animals. It has a black polished cotton backing, which is brought to the front to create the binding. We purchased the quilt on eBay in 2008. We associated it with the language of flowers because of the profusion of flowers. Colorful embroidery stitches decorate the seams.
Young Victorian ladies were required to learn the meanings of the language of flowers. Each flower had a specific meaning. Victorian crazy quilters were careful not to use flowers with negative connotations. They could buy or receive patterns published in magazines such as Godey's Ladies Book. I find DaleHarvey.com is a great modern online resource for the language of flowers.
Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet opened the first school for the deaf in the United States. His youngest son, Edward Minor Gallaudet, founded the first college for the deaf in 1864. 30 years later, in 1894, it was renamed Gallaudet College in honor of his father. It became Gallaudet University in 1954. Gallaudet was memorialized in this ribbon next to the deer. Gallaudet invented American Sign Language. This ribbon suggests a tie to Washington, D.C., the home of Gallaudet University. We were excited to discover the row of menorahs under the Gallaudet block. We had not seen Judaic symbols previously. Christian symbols are seen in other blocks on this quilt.
The red rose symbolizes love. It's the national flower of the United States of America. The stem of wild pink roses honor motherhood. 1894 may be the date the quilt was finished. The sheep, cat licking his paw, and horse embroidery are examples of free patterns. I love how she added daisies on her monogram. Daisies symbolize loyalty, love, I'll never tell, and love conquers all. The stems of wheat symbolize prosperity.
The bouquet of daisies on the left is made from silk ribbon. Their centers are French knots. She used oil paint to create the wild rose. Stylized forget-me-nots below the monogram make a pretty bouquet. They symbolize remembrance and constancy. Forget-me-not.
A bouquet of multicolored flowers is stitched with silk and cotton threads. It includes a daisy made of silk ribbon. I absolutely love the strawberries made with Kensington stitch. Strawberries suggest goodness, esteem, and love. Her embroidery is beautifully executed. My favorite on this square is a row of snowflakes. She often added rectangular patches along the sides of blocks to square them up.
This photo shows a Christian symbol we referred to earlier. The monogram IHS represents the holy name for Jesus Christ. It appears with a cross.
Minute forget-me-nots form a pretty wreath. The seams are covered with colorful embroidery stitches.
The dog with the American flag is also an image new to us. Below the flag are a rifle and a sword. A jet black bead forms his eye. If you look closely, you will notice he's holding the flag in his mouth. His tongue is lolling out of his mouth, and he has a little pink nose.
Pansies mean kindness and pleasant thoughts. I like this spider dangling from its web while the 3 chicks below are trying to reach it for their breakfast.
Faithfulness, modesty, virtue, affection, and love are symbolized here with the embroidered violets. The Christian symbol of the cross is surrounded with stitched silk ribbon blossoms. Pansy Society Crazy Quilt was the first crazy quilt we purchased. It was August 2nd, 1982.
Previously, we searched and searched for a crazy quilt and were unable to find one we liked. We drove to Tennessee and looked through antique stores along the way. We came back to Colorado and visited Alan's parents in Leadville and found this quilt. The dealer had purchased it at a fundraising bazaar for the First Congregational Church in Denver.
The quilt has an unusual construction. There are 4 different sized blocks, 1 large square and 3 variously sized rectangles. It has a maroon silk border. The quilt is made of silk velvets and includes intricately loomed brocade ribbons, velvets, satin, plaid, and striped silk.
The painting of the wild roses and several pieces of the fabric match a crazy quilt in the collection of the Denver Art Museum. That quilt was made by 5 daughters of a prominent doctor in Denver during the late 1800s. Is it possible that this quilt was made by the same women? I certainly like to think so.
There are hand-embroidered and oil-painted flowers, including the pansy with the inscription Pansy Society. The seams are hand-embroidered with silk floss. Feather stitch variations are most common.
Victorian women used needlework skills, painting, and writing as a means of artistic expression. The backing on this quilt is a maroon quilted silk. Sailing the Seas. We purchased Sailing the Seas at an antique shop in Colorado Springs around 1988. It was our second crazy quilt. The owner, Debbie, knew Alan and I loved crazy quilts. She had one from her great-grandfather. Debbie asked if we wanted her to bring it in so we could see it. She was thrilled that we were interested. She knew we would treasure it. Debbie's great-grandfather was the captain of a ship which sailed from Boston Harbor during the late 1800s into the early 1900s.
Debbie's great-grandmother made this utilitarian crazy quilt from wools, wool blends, and heavy cottons. Fabrics include solids, plaids, and tweeds. The lower corners of this quilt were designed to fit the 4-poster bed he slept in on the schooner. The quilt has a wool plaid border.
It's thrilling to think that this crazy quilt once sailed upon the open seas. When our son was 3 and got his first big boy bed, the quilt was often displayed on his antique bed.
The stylized folk art style embroidery features many wool embroidered flowers and leaves. The brown patches are perked up by the use of orange, turquoise, yellow, purple, red, blue, and white in both fabrics and yarns. Wool yarns were used to embroider the floral motifs and seams using a fly stitch.
Upon inspection of this quilt, you can see that Debbie's great-grandmother repaired it several times, especially near the top edge, where he pulled it up around his chin to keep himself warm. Unfortunately, we didn't think to get more personal information about Debbie's ancestors when we bought the quilt. Union Crazy Quilt. The Union Crazy Quilt was purchased on eBay in 2007. We believe this quilt was made in Ohio during the 1880s, the heyday of the crazy quilt fad. This crazy quilt includes 15 squares arranged in 3 rows of 5. It is made from luxurious silks, satins, brocades, and ribbons. It features a large blue velvet border, beautifully executed embroidery, metal paillettes, glass beads, and oil-painted patches. The predominant colors are blue, rust, and gold.
The Union Shield design symbolizes President Abraham Lincoln's preservation of the United States as a single country. Metal and silk threads highlight the ribbon with roses. Layers of stitches embellish the seams. Textured rust-colored velvet is featured in many blocks.
Here's another view of the ribbons emanating from the Union's shield. Notice the beautifully embroidered flowers. This crazy quilt maker was very industrious.
Rust velvet was used for this Baptist fan. The floral embroidery is beautiful. The benefit of using ribbons is their finished edges. This close-up of the flowers on the ribbon demonstrates more subtle use of color.
A brown velvet moon is dotted with glass beads. The fan is made using fancy silk fabrics pieced together with added embellishment. A black band with yellow stitching defines the fan. Plaid silks get extra attention with cross stitches in the layers inside the square. The brocade rose ribbon is attached using buttonhole stitches.
Blue velvet, like the border, forms a fan in this block. Folded triangles highlight the edge, and metal threads are couched in place. Bullion knots form the wheat. A spider web is on the left. Spiders are common on crazy quilts. They symbolized luck. Spiders provided pest control.
A butterfly and flowers adorn this block.
York. The York Crazy Quilt was purchased on eBay in December 2013. It was purchased from a dealer in York, Pennsylvania. The quilt is assembled from blocks on point. Its maker, whose surname likely begins with an F, worked to camouflage the blocks by adding pieces which overlap the seams after the blocks were joined.
We love the ribbons and array of plaids, stripes, and fancy silk fabrics. It has an unusual color palette featuring maroon, yellow, and turquoise. The embroidery is well done. Around the border, maroon and gold fabric triangles alternate. They are embroidered with Kate Greenaway children, fruit, birds, teacups, and flowers.
Catherine, Kate Greenaway, was an English Victorian artist and writer. She's known for her children's book illustrations. She illustrated an 1884 edition of The Language of Flowers and is one of the most popular children's illustrators of all time. A full generation of mothers dressed their daughters in Kate Greenaway pantaloons and bonnets from the 1880s into the 1890s. The dresses were versions of the late 18th century Regency fashions: smocked frocks, high-waisted pinafores, and dresses with mob caps and straw bonnets for girls.
The colors in the plaid fabric seem to represent the dominant colors in the quilt. Primary colors, red and blue, along with black and brown and cream, are also included.
This crazy quilt has a 4-inch wide ruffled lace treatment on the edge. It is original to the quilt. The Sears Crazy Quilt. The Sears Crazy Quilt was made by Georgiana Perry Sears for her son Charles Sears in Cincinnati, Ohio. It is made of silks and other fancies, including plain wovens, velvets, brocades, cotton, and felt. Her embroidery used silk, cotton, and chenille flosses. It has a polished cotton border and backing. Georgiana used buttonhole, feather, herringbone, stem, and outline stitches in many variations and combinations.
This quilt has a remarkable story that relates to the phrase, "One man's trash is another man's treasure." Georgiana and Charles lived in Ohio. Charles married in 1900. He and his wife did not have children. Apparently, after they died, the quilt went to Charles's brother, Harry Sears. When he died, it went to his daughter, Carolyn Sears, who moved with her family to Florida. Their son inherited the quilt. At his passing in 1982, the contents of the house in Florida were given to the extended family. The house was willed to charity. Apparently, the family was upset they were not receiving the real estate. They brought in 2 massive dumpsters and threw all of the belongings from the house into the dumpster. A lady that lived next door to this house had always loved the Sears quilt. She saw it go into the dumpster and was determined to retrieve the quilt. After the family members left that night, she and her husband, 2 octogenarians, decided they were going dumpster diving. They were successful. When she went into the nursing home, she gave the quilt to her nephew, an antique dealer, who had the quilt refurbished. Some of the pieces of the quilt were totally shattered. He sent the quilt for restoration to Colorado and had it repaired. He listed the quilt on eBay with proceeds to benefit the painting of his church. We were the lucky ones to win the bid on eBay.
Georgiana commenced working on this quilt in 1889 and finished in 1899. She was an accomplished needle artist and put in all the bells and whistles. There are ribbons, fans, a rooster, a frog, Christian symbols, as well as fraternal orders, including the Oddfellows, Elks, and Masons. The triple links are a recurring symbol among Oddfellows internationally, standing for their motto of friendship, love, and truth. The benevolent and protective order of the Elks is represented by a fancy elk embellishment.
Japanese women reflect the influence of the Centennial Exhibition and its Japanese pavilion. The faces of the 4 figures are made of linen paper.
A presidential ribbon featuring Ohio's own William McKinley and his running mate Garrett Hobart for the 1896 presidential campaign is also featured. McKinley won the election. Unfortunately, Hobart died of heart disease in 1899. Hobart's replacement on the Republican electoral ticket, Theodore Roosevelt, became president after McKinley's assassination in 1901.
The American flag on the quilt spans the years from 1877 until 1890, with 38 stars, and became the official American flag when the state of Colorado was admitted to the Union in August of 1876.
There's a Liberty Bell, complete with crack. It appears to be made from a felt-like material. Many of Georgiana's blocks are dated. We assume the dates represent when she worked on that block. For example, the Victorian shoe is dated 1890. She raised the skirt so viewers can see the whole boot and get a glimpse of the lady's pantaloons.
How risque. Jumbo the elephant from the Barnum and Bailey Circus appear on many crazy quilts.
Padded trapunto is noted on the jumbo block. Georgiana experimented with stitching and embellishments. Chenille was used to embroider a wild rose. A beautiful ribbon celebrating Columbus's memorial for 400 years was included from 1892.
We hope you enjoyed seeing some of the quilts from our collection. We love all types of quilts, but crazy quilts are our favorites.
I realized there were many repeat comments. I had 2 purposes. 1, to call your attention to aspects I believe contribute to the quilt's success. And 2, to allow time for you to enjoy the quilter's handiwork.
We have given several lectures about crazy quilts at quilt guilds and other museums. If you have questions, please contact us at allenbrown805@gmail.com. Thank you for your interest in crazy quilts.